The smell of cinnamon glaze and roasted ham always takes me back only this year. It sits wrong in my stomach. I'm Tessa Rowland, 34, Navy pilot turned flight instructor, good at keeping planes steady and tempers even. At home, though, I still feel like the quiet kid at the grown-ups table. The Rowlands fill every inch of my uncle's house cousins chasing each other between chairs, a fireplace crackling under too many stockings, my aunt fussing with cranberry sauce. And at the center, Dylan, my cousin, the family's golden boy, loud, built like confidence itself, raising his glass like he's at a banquet. To Tessa, he says, grinning. Our resident desk jockey, keeping the Navy paperwork flying high. Laughter breaks across the table. Forks clatter, glasses lift. I breathe once. Steady. The way they taught us before landing in crosswinds. Not exactly. I say. I fly. Dylan tilts his head, savoring the attention. Yeah, prove it. For a moment, I hear nothing. No clinking. No laughter, just the low hum of the ceiling fan and the faint whine in my ears that never really left after Mogadishu. Across the table, Uncle Mark sets his drink down. The lines around his mouth tighten. The metals on the mantel catch the light. Apologize, he says. His voice isn't loud, but it lands like a command. Now, the entire room freezes. Even the children stop whispering. Dylan blinks, unsure if this is still a joke. For what? For mocking the pilot who saved my team. Mark answers. The fire pops. Someone drops a spoon. I look at him, at the man who once told me silence keeps the peace, and see something different, regret, maybe, or relief. No one speaks again until the clock chimes 9, and when it does, I finally breathe. The air outside still smelled like pine and cold gravy when I got back to my place near the airfield. The night hummed with crickets and distant turbines. The kind of white noise that used to lull me to sleep on deployment. I left my boots by the door and sat on the floor beside the couch, not ready to face the silence. It was never truly quiet. Not since Somalia. The laughter from dinner replayed in my head, sharper now that the house was empty. I tried to shrug it off, but memory doesn't listen to logic. It rewinds on its own terms. 1 second, I'm staring at the blinking light on my coffee maker. The next, I'm back in the cockpit, heat pouring through my gloves, radio screaming for air support. Revenant 1. Do you copy? Holding steady. The words were muscle memory, the voice calm only because panic wasted oxygen. The night we pulled Captain Mark Rowland's unit out of a burning convoy, the horizon was nothing but fire. I remember the smell of diesel, the sound of metal splitting under stress, the weight of knowing there wasn't enough fuel to circle twice. We made it home, barely. A week later, Mark found me on the tarmac. He still had burns down his left arm, his uniform stiff with salt and sand. Let it go, Tessa, he said quietly. That mission's classified. Better forgotten. I agreed. At 28, I thought silence was professionalism. Maybe even loyalty. I didn't understand how it could turn into disappearance. Tonight, the engines from the nearby base rumbled low through the walls. I closed my eyes, feeling their vibration in my chest like a pulse steady, alive, impossible to ignore. Somewhere out there, another pilot was taking off into darkness, trusting that someone believed she could. I used to think silence kept me safe. Now it just kept me unseen. The next morning, sunlight leaked through the blinds in thin, uneven stripes. I sat at the kitchen counter, spoon deep in cold oatmeal, scrolling through family photos my aunt had posted overnight. There it was, another shot of the Rowland legacy, my Uncle Mark in his pressed uniform, standing tall beside my cousin Dylan, who'd just been accepted into SEAL prep training. The caption read, "Proud of our warriors. The Rowland men carry the flag forward. No mention of me. There never was. In our family, courage had a gender. My grandfather was a decorated Marine, my uncle a SEAL, my cousin, their heir apparent. I was the footnote they never quite figured out how to frame. Too tough to be dismissed, too quiet to be celebrated. Dad was the only one who never tried to fit me into that mold. He'd been a mechanic, happiest under the hood of an old Piper Cub, hands black with oil. He used to say machines were like people, keep them balanced and they won't fail you. He died the year before I enlisted. The day I got my wings, I imagined him clapping from somewhere just beyond the clouds, at family gatherings. Mark's stories filled the air, heroic rescues. Storms survived, leadership under fire. His voice had a rhythm that made silence feel like weakness. Whenever the talk turned to me, it was softer. She's doing well with her little helicopters, someone would say, as if I were babysitting machinery instead of carrying human lives over combat zones. It had been easy to believe Mark's quiet after the mission was military protocol, but the older I got, the more it felt like something else, a decision to protect the legend. Maybe in the Roland storybook, there wasn't room for a niece who'd outflown her heroes. Outside, the distant whir of engines rose again, steady as breath. I watched the sky through the kitchen window, the same sky Dad taught me to trust. For years, I'd mistaken silence for respect. Now, it just sounded like a cover story no one wanted to rewrite. The knock came just after sunrise. 3 sharp raps that carried the rhythm of authority. I opened the door to find Uncle Mark standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes hidden behind the same aviator sunglasses he'd worn since I was a kid. The cold air framed him in pale mist, as if even the morning wasn't sure it wanted him here. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said, "just checking in." He wasn't the kind of man who checked in. Still, I stepped aside and let him pass. The scent of coffee filled the small kitchen, mixed with the salt that drifted inland from the bay. He glanced around the room, the flight manual stacked on the counter, the photos taped above the desk before settling on the old Piper Cub model my dad built for me when I was 12. "You kept that," he said quietly. "Some things are worth keeping," I replied. He nodded, then took off his glasses. For the first time in years, I saw his eyes without armor. "That night," he began, "in Mogadishu, I lost a man before you reached us. He was 23. I thought if I buried the story, maybe it would stop replaying." He paused. I thought keeping quiet would protect what was left. I waited, the hum of the fridge the only sound between us. "You protected your image," I said finally, "not his memory." The words landed heavier than I expected. He didn't argue, just reached into his pocket and placed something on the counter, a tarnished seal challenge coin, the emblem rubbed nearly smooth from years of use. "Figured you should have it," he said. "It's not the one I earned," I answered. He hesitated at the door, then nodded once. "No," he said, "but it's the one I owe." When he left, the kitchen felt smaller, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. The coin caught the first strip of sunlight across the counter, glinting once before the light moved on. The Veterans Center smelled of coffee and disinfectant, 2 scents that always meant someone was trying to make broken things feel normal. I'd agreed to speak on flight safety protocols for new pilots, but mostly I came for the quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't judge. Rows of chairs faced a faded flag, the edges frayed from years of folding and unfolding. After my talk, a few old-timers lingered in the back. I poured myself a cup of burnt coffee and listened as they swapped stories, different wars. Same ghosts. One of them, a gray-haired Marine with a prosthetic arm, said, "Remember that pilot in Mogadishu call sign Revenant 1? Pulled a whole team out under fire. Captain Roland's crew. Saved their asses." The other man shook his head. "Heard she vanished after no interviews, no recognition." Maybe that's how legends work. They don't need names. They laughed softly, a mix of reverence and distance. I stood there, the paper cup cooling in my hand, realizing they were talking about me like I'd already died. My story lived in their memories, just not in my own family's house. Later, in the parking lot, I sat in my truck scrolling through social media. Dylan's face filled the screen shirtless in a training pool, captioned Future SEAL, carrying on the Roland legacy. Hundreds of likes. A few proud of you. Son comments from relatives who still thought heroism had a specific gender. I locked the phone and set it face down on the passenger seat. The silence inside the cab felt heavier than the desert night I used to fly through. I started the engine and drove east, toward the coast. By the time I reached the water, the sun was falling behind the dunes. The air smelled of salt, rust, and old jet fuel, the kind that clings to your skin long after you've landed. Waves broke unevenly along the shore, the rhythm almost matching the low thrum of a rotor in descent. I closed my eyes, the wind biting through my jacket, and felt that vibration again, the one that meant motion, risk, life. My voice came out low, carried off by the wind before it reached the tide. Not a ghost, I said. Not anymore. By early summer, the Rolands had found another reason to gather Uncle Mark's 60th birthday. The house looked almost identical to Christmas, the same twinkle lights along the staircase, the same tablecloth with faint wine stains that no one bothered to wash out. Even the laughter sounded rehearsed, the kind that came too easily after years of habit. I arrived late, a box of lemon bars in hand, and caught the familiar smell of roast and bourbon. Mark sat at the head of the table, posture still military straight despite the soft weight of age around his shoulders. Across from him, Dylan was in his element, loud and sunburned from weeks of SEAL prep, surrounded by relatives who treated him like the family's next war story. To our heroes, he called out, raising his beer, and to the old man who started it all. Everyone clapped, glasses colliding in a clumsy chorus. Someone added, half laughing, and to Tessa, the admin who keeps them organized, the room erupted again, lighter this time, except for Mark, who didn't join in. He just watched me. Unreadable, as if weighing every breath. At the far end of the table, one of his old teammates, a man with a faded SEAL trident tattooed on his forearm, was already deep into his third drink. He squinted at me, voice slurred but sharp. Wait, he said, pointing. You mean Revenant 1? That's her. The sound cracked through the room like static. Forks froze midair. Dylan laughed, assuming it was a bar joke. Revenant 1. Sure, my cousin's a legend now. Mark didn't move. His jaw tightened, the way it did when someone said something careless about service. I set my glass down, my pulse steady in my throat. The same silence from Christmas wrapped around the table again, heavier this time, layered with something close to fear. I stood, the chair legs scraping the floor. You wanted proof, right? I said quietly. Dylan's grin faltered, the light from the chandelier flickering across his face as the room waited for the rest of the truth to land. The air inside the dining room thickened, heavy with the smell of roast and the sharp edge of embarrassment. The laughter that had carried the night only minutes ago now hung somewhere between confusion and disbelief. Dylan leaned back in his chair, eyes darting around for someone to laugh with him. No one did. Revenant 1, the SEAL repeated, pointing again. That was you, wasn't it? My throat felt dry, but my voice came steady. It was. The sound rippled through the table, quiet shock, muffled whispers, the clink of a single fork sliding onto porcelain. Dylan gave a nervous laugh. Come on, you're serious. You're saying you were that pilot across from him? Uncle Mark rose slowly, the wooden chair legs scraping against the floorboards. His shadow stretched across the tablecloth, cutting the light in two. When he spoke, his voice had shifted, no longer uncle, no longer father. It was the voice of command, the one that made men move without thought. Apologize, he said. Now. The word didn't shout. It landed. Final. Unquestionable. Dylan blinked, confusion flickering into fear. For what I didn't know, Mark's gaze sharpened. You didn't ask. Silence answered him. The old clock in the hallway ticked loud enough to feel like gunfire. He turned toward me then, eyes unguarded, voice dropping lower. You flew through fire so we could come home. You carried us out when everything went to hell. I've lived with that night every day since. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, dull, with age. When he set it in my hand, the metal was warm from his touch, a brass challenge coin, the one from his team, the one he should have given years ago. No one spoke. No one clapped. They just stood there, the legend they'd built bending to make space for a truth they'd ignored. I looked down at the coin, its edges smoothed by time and guilt, and felt the weight of what it meant acknowledgement. At last. My chest loosened, and for the first time in years, I drew a full breath. The sound of it quiet, clean, filled the room like something sacred. The house had gone quiet by the time I stepped outside. The night air smelled of salt and leftover smoke from the grill. Down the hill, the tide pressed against the docks in slow, steady rhythm. I leaned on the railing of the porch, the brass coin still warm in my palm. Behind me, the door creaked open. Uncle Mark came out without a word, jacket slung over one shoulder, the porch light catching the faint silver at his temples. He stopped beside me, staring toward the black horizon. For a while, we just listened to the waves, to the echo of everything that hadn't needed saying. I thought silence was protection, he said finally. His voice sounded smaller now, stripped of rank. Turns out it was pride. I didn't want anyone to know my life had been saved by someone younger, smaller, braver. Maybe I didn't want to admit how much I owed you. The honesty hit harder than any apology could. I turned the coin in my hand, the engraving catching a streak of moonlight. You can't fix the past, I said. But you can stop repeating it. He nodded, jaw working like he wanted to argue and couldn't. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out another coin, this one darker, worn smooth at the edges. This one's mine, he said. Carried it for 30 years. Figured it belongs with the person who reminded me what service actually means. I hesitated before taking it, the metal warm from his touch. For the first time, the silence between us didn't feel like distance. Then we're even, I said quietly. Pilot and seal. He chuckled a soft, tired sound, carried off by the wind. I hadn't heard him laugh like that since I was a kid. We stood there until the porch light flickered out. Two silhouettes framed by the same moon, the sea whispering below us like it had waited years to see this peaceland. A year later, Christmas came softer. The Rowland house still glowed with the same warm lights, but the noise had changed. Laughter carried lower, real instead of loud. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen blended with the sound of carols from an old radio, the kind my aunt never replaced because she said new things lacked soul. When I walked in, Dylan was the first to spot me. He looked different, less armor in his grin, less need to fill the room. The sleeves of his button-down were rolled to the elbow, showing a new tattoo, not the seal trident he used to boast about getting one day, but the simple outline of folded wings. Glad you made it, he said, handing me a mug of cider. I, started working with the Veterans Outreach Office last spring. Help guys get back on their feet after deployments. I nodded, the pride that flickered in his voice cleaner than before. Across the room, Uncle Mark sat near the tree, wrapped in a wool blanket, eyes bright beneath the dim lamp. He looked smaller somehow, but lighter too. Come here. Evan, Dylan called, motioning to his son, a boy with sandy hair and serious eyes. The kid ran over, shy at first, clutching a toy plane with chipped blue paint. This is your Aunt Tessa, Dylan said. She's the pilot who brought Grandpa home. Evan's eyes widened. That quiet awe only children can hold without words. Your Revenant One, he asked, like saying a name from a bedtime legend. I smiled. Now I teach others to fly. He studied me for a moment, then held up his toy plane. Will you teach me someday? I crouched to meet his gaze. If you promise not to forget where home is. He nodded solemnly. the way only 6-year-olds can, behind us. Mark cleared his throat, pretending to sip his drink, though I could see the shimmer in his eyes. The room felt whole in a way it never had before, not because the noise was gone, but because, for once, every voice belonged. The road into Wilmington hadn't changed much, same salt-stung wind off the water, same oak trees bending toward the coast. I rolled the window down, letting the air rush in, tasting the familiar mix of sea and memory. It had been years since I'd been home on leave. The Rowland house came into view at the end of the lane, its paint a little more faded, its porch sagging under the weight of seasons. But the flag still moved steady in the breeze. On the steps sat Evan, taller now, lean and deliberate like his father. He was polishing something with quiet focus, a small brass coin turning slow between his fingers. When he looked up, the sunlight caught at a glint of gold that pulled the years together in a single flash. "Hey, Aunt Tessa," he said, voice deeper but still carrying that boyish steadiness. "Dad told me to keep it clean, said it matters." "It does," I said, sitting beside him. The porch creaked under our weight, the same way it used to when Mark and I stood here after long dinners and longer silences. Inside, the low hum of conversation drifted through the screen door. Uncle Mark sat in his usual chair, a blanket across his knees, eyes half closed but alert enough to notice me. He gave a small nod, no salute this time, just quiet recognition. Overhead, the roar of jets broke across the sky. T-45s from Pensacola, silver wings slicing through the winter air. Evan looked up, smiling. "You miss it?" he asked. "Sometimes," I said, "but the ones who matter already know." The sunlight caught the coin again, bright and certain in his palm. I watched it gleam against the sky I once chased for a living, and for the first time, it felt like it finally belonged to all of us.